There's always plus. Wow.
Sure.
All right. I feel like the troika is the establishment of critical mass. So
There has to be a good name for a 4-person.
Troika.
yeah,
The
well, you see,
troika.
I see Kate as the czar over her
The
little
troika,
kingdom.
the presence of the troika and the czar.
That's right. She's
Wouldn't
the
it be
czar,
like
and then
a-
we got the troika, and then
Would it be a quadroika?
I think the branding of your terminology has some obvious problems, David.
unfortunately these are common bureaucratic
Very
terms.
authoritarian.
Well, but the troika and the czar didn't interact very well historically.
Changing history.
That's right. We're
I like it.
rewriting it.
And I can be the gadfly.
Yeah, I was thinking you were the knight, but all right. I mean, like, why not mix up, right? The metaphors, since it's that, since it's so precise already.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, cool. Right. Where are we? What's
Oh,
happening?
also-
Quentin's here.
I'm here.
hey,
Here,
Quentin.
Quentin, I really enjoyed that podcast.
Which
It was a fun
podcast?
conversation. I really liked talking. Yeah.
What
I still
podcast?
need to
Where's the
listen to
link?
it.
Yeah,
I saw it on Twitter.
I can put it on the Slack.
Yeah, put it on the Slack.
I didn't.
Reimagining justice.
That's when I saw the photo of you with hair, and I was like,
Here,
wow.
I'll just drop it in right here.
Okay, cool. We'll all listen to that tonight.
Do I have longer hair in picture that she put on this?
Yeah. And I was also like, that is not social distancing. I wanted to comment, like, concerned citizen.
Yeah, well, that was
Oh,
from
that's why she
earlier.
put it was in
I
January.
know, that's what I figured. Before I concerned citizen at Quentin.
Every YouTube thing I watch now is like, this is from before the plague. This is from before the plague times. In the before times. This
In the
is what
before
we do.
times.
No,
You
no
know what's
yelling.
really strange? You can go to Florida Law Help. You just go to their front page, and there's nothing about coronavirus or COVID-19. And it's a whole triage thing. And you can't, and it doesn't come up, and it just, because I was looking at, we had somebody email the website this morning for legal help who's from Florida. And I was, what I try to do is go find something for people.
Right.
And there's nothing.
I believe
And
they lost their funding. I believe that the entity that does that lost their funding.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. It's at the bar though, I think you're right, but it was, I did eventually find something, but it was a link to a link to a link, the whole thing. I was going, does Florida even have a moratorium on evictions?
I don't think so. I
They
don't know.
do. They do
Oh, they
have
do?
some, but it
Oh,
also might be
Yes, it is.
county. Yeah, it's
Okay.
very hard to find, but they're little pieces.
Anyway, sorry.
Anyway, it was a great podcast.
Yeah.
We should all give it a listen. Quentin
Yeah.
does
I'm
a great
excited.
job of giving shout outs to everybody. He does a really good job of explaining what the project is. And you get to hear about some of his work previously with MAID and how that all worked out.
Oh, awesome. That's really cool. Yeah. Okay, so where we're at.
And I learned he loved Taganek Falls, which is literally one of my happy places.
Oh,
Aw,
that's
neat.
nice.
Yeah, David and I both share Cornell in common, although undergrad and law school. Although I also grew up in Ithaca, which is the main reason why I know Taganek so well.
Okay. I
Okay,
don't know
so
where
the
any of this
209A, right?
Yes.
Sorry,
All right.
I want to talk
209A.
more about
Wait for water.
Quentin's Are we gonna- childhood. Are we just
Okay.
focusing on 209A and the stand-up, or are we going to talk about other stuff?
I think
the thing is, other stuff comes into it in the sense that we're developing it as we develop the 209A.
Right.
So, like, for example, the plain language call that we had today, Caroline, I think that'll come in. But I think that at this moment that we all agreed that the sprint is to the 209A. So
Okay.
we've got the plain language. Okay, so Caroline, Emily, and myself had a call where we talked about the plain language and just some of the main issues that would come up, how to refer to the user, how to refer to mass access. And I took some notes which I distributed to Caroline and Emily. I'm not sure if you had a look at that yet, Caroline.
No, I had to dive right into something else.
Okay, no, so what I'll do is I'll just get the AOK from them and then I'll put that on the admin channel. And it's basically just a guideline on how to proceed with the plain language for the 209A. I'm going to take on the affidavit of care and custody, and I've spoken to Caroline about that on the call as well, putting that into plain language. But otherwise, where are we at with the other forms in the plain language on them?
I think the only one that's not necessarily ready would be complaint page 2, because I know Michelle's finishing that off. The affidavit should be ready. I think that's the only one
for plain language.
Yeah,
That's what
for,
we're-
for
okay,
plain
yeah.
language. So the affidavit, if we can, I think that's in GitHub, and I think that could be plain language too. So really, Caroline has page 1. I had sent plaintiff confidential info, dependent info, and child support affidavit to Emily, but anyone, obviously, I don't care how you guys divide your work up.
Yeah, no, there was just one last thing that I wanted to talk about with Caroline and Emily, which was just the using the imperative or using how we were going to show respect. That was just something that came up in our call, which we need to talk about internally. And then once we have a consensus between that, we'll come to you as a team with that. Because basically the idea was that we address these issues, think about these issues, and then put them together in a document that you can read through and comment on. So we don't all have to be involved in this kind of like wrangling, figuring out what's going on there. So that's where we're at with that. I think by the end of today, we'll be able to get that document, depending on Caroline, your availability, and Emily's obviously as well. And then
when do you think you'll have like individual forms for SME review?
Let me just have a look. I think the shorter one, there was 2 that I was going to do, the affidavit of care and custody, and
I feel like, so Caroline did most of the language writing for the whole affidavit, so that's probably in really solid shape.
Yeah, I might have
so I don't
to
have to do much there.
Right, so that might be one you just glance at as one more set of eyes.
Kate, remember, and Maeve, we're talking, remember, there's affidavit of care, and there's affidavit, right? Michelle?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's all. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, so Maeve has the affidavit of care, but maybe if Maeve could take like a very quick look at the big affidavit, because I feel like that's probably fine.
There may be some placeholder stuff in there, Maeve, because Kendall and I did it together on a Saturday afternoon, and so I didn't want to hold up his time to do some crafting. You know what I mean? We might have just had some placeholder language in there, but I think for the most part, because he's kind of a plain language person too, believe it or not.
But now the issue with the affidavit of care and custody then is this is the other affidavit, is the splitting up of that complex, that first question. Now, is that something that's going to be done in plain language, or is that going to be done at a later stage, or?
If you have an idea for how to ask it without changing like the follow-on logic, then because so the way that I was thinking about it is we have those check boxes. You have to affirmatively say what you know or don't know about and what you participated in and what you haven't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to let someone actually check the box indicating those 2 things.
Yeah, but Quentin, I think what you can do is you can ask 2 questions, because you're asking so much at once. So you can ask about now, and
are there any cases?
And then you can ask about past, and then
were there any cases?
Yeah, and then you can still get those boxes checked. I mean, basically, right? And so
as long as we end up with those boxes and it's an affirmative question, rewrite it however we want. That's what I was trying to get to. Is we can add more questions to break it down, as long as we ultimately have someone say something like those things.
Right.
So if I don't break up the logic flow, can I try and play around a little bit with that and see if?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just very conscious. Yeah, Kate.
I was gonna say, so whenever you guys like finish an individual form, I would say send it to me and I'll deal with. Sarah's gonna do some too. I think my plan was, if it's a form that I did any substantial work on already, I'm gonna have Sarah do that.
What's Sarah gonna do?
Same role, just making sure final check on legal substance.
Oh, that the plain
accuracy
language hasn't corrupted the meaning.
Yeah. So if it's a form I did any work on early on, I was going to have Sarah do that, just to have not me being biased by my earlier whatever I did.
Yeah.
And then I'll do those 2 affidavits, right? Yeah. Because it doesn't sound like that's. I mean, if Caroline was involved in the drafting, I imagine that it's already in a very plain language state.
Yeah.
And then what else is outstanding?
So Emily has 3 in her possession right now, but that might be too much for her. So like if you finish up, maybe you would take one of those from her or someone else, whichever one of you.
Yeah, I know she was working on an art project with her kid today as well. So that looked hectic. So I'll definitely check in with her first to see how far I get with those affidavits, because and then see what I can take on from her. And And then, so that's the plain language. Then we give you the plain language documents, and we submit the plain language, and then what is the next step? The SME.
SME looks it over, make sure like nothing legally got corrupted. I imagine that's going to be a super quick stage. I think Sarah and I could read over one of those forms and get it turned around like very, very quickly. So okay. I don't imagine you guys are going to be doing too much corruption of the legal stuff.
So Kate, you're happy to have just one SME. There's a few things that I think we need, where we had the meeting the other week. I thought that was very helpful, this discussion. Things like you were concerned about including the defense in the visitation question about defendants still being able to, plaintiff feeling like if they didn't answer anything about visitation, they would be bound to some rule that they don't know about. And I just ran that by both Kate and Jeff. Well, Katie Milton. Yeah. From I get you. I know you're both Kates. You're Kate. So Katie Milton, who's been at Casimirna, and she's really uncomfortable with including that concept. So it may.
Well, I think it is. You included language in the flow document, and I think it's addressed by that.
So the thing is, in the flow document, I say, see the visitation Google Doc.
Hey guys, excuse me. Yeah. I just wanted to I don't know if this is the place to get into specific plain language conversation.
No, we're not. I'm not. I'm just saying that this is an example of why I think we need to have maybe a group of SMEs look at some of the stuff, because you're talking about, this is a process thing, and maybe we want to talk about it as a 209A, but I think it's important that we have more than one DV attorney look at some of the language, because we are talking about strategy.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was my idea. Like the complaint page too, I wouldn't be the SME reviewer on, because I've done a lot of the language, so that would be Sarah.
Yeah, but I was just thinking you might want more, like we had that before.
We also have reached out to, although I don't know if we've heard, Laura, but then Laura's also reached out to some of the Safe Plan folks, and Kate, I think, has the contact.
Yeah, so I think certain things we ought to flag for, sort of group.
I'm confident Kate's going to run it by folks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then in terms of, we know where the next step is. Does anybody have any blocks that they are experiencing work-wise? That's anything that's getting held up?
I mean, I think, this is mostly for Quentin and Michelle. The place all the forms that I worked on are at is that, they're all in branches, they're all committed, and there's definitely things that need to be worked on with them, but I believe they're things that are related to the stitching together process and basic questions.
Okay.
And I think I've had this conversation with folks separately, but I'm happy to help with that to the extent that it is helpful to have more than one person working on it. I'm a little antsy to know what the plan is, but that's just me and my personality. Otherwise, right now, what I'm working on personally is trying to do some manual testing. And I've got a test case that I'm going to share with the group in a little bit for 209A page 1. But if there's other stuff that is blocking folks, particularly on the code, that they could use help with, let me know, and I can spend my time on that instead.
Okay.
That sounds
Thank
good.
you for that. Yeah.
So I'd just like to ask, well, where are other people not on this call feeling with their capacity? Because I know not everyone is being consumed by 209A. So are we being sure to have people who are not working on this have things to do?
So I think John somebody or other doesn't have stuff right now. There's some newer members who I'm not sure if they've gotten messages yet. Lance, we're trying to engage a bit more, and those are the people that I know about, other than Toby, who hasn't really gotten back to us, other than people who haven't really, I don't know, there's some people that I don't know if we should follow up or not.
And Michelle and Maeve and Kate, tell me if you think this is wrong, but I also think part of the problem is I know I'm holding capacity in reserve, because I know any day right now that there's probably going to need to be something that happens with the 209A. And I'm just really sensitive to the fact that personally that it takes a lot of work from the managerial side to spin people up on a new set of forms. And I don't know if I feel comfortable devoting a lot of time to that until the 209A is done. And because I know from working on all kinds of projects that like the space between 90% done and done is often the hardest and most time intensive.
So for example, with Lance, we're starting him on onboarding new volunteers so that we don't have to take care of that. Like there's stuff that can be done that isn't going to take a whole lot of onboarding, or so I hope. And I think the other bit is to communicate, we know you're here, we're still thinking about you, we can't take this on right now, but we're going to after this stage is over, right? Because otherwise they just think they've disappeared. I've been on the other side of that.
That's the main thing I
like,
want to make sure we don't have happen.
Yeah.
Well,
the other group.
I think something to keep in mind is that we may not ever feel like we're done, but we might still have to say, this is ready enough to make public. And I find forms that I finished a while ago, there's still going to be, someone will come and find something that they want to change or improve, or that was a bug we didn't catch, even though we did a lot of testing in all different ways. So we may never feel like we're done. So it might make sense to slow down our end game of not really being done, because we're never done, but being more done by a week, if it means that we can capture people now that we might lose.
Yeah. There are people that
I think we have a very like concrete measure of done actually, which is it has been submitted to the courts. Once it has been submitted to the courts, we can switch gears to work on a different level. But there is a very hard very hard line. Yeah, they will, but it'll be gone for a while. We'll have time to regroup, and then we'll make the changes. But I'm saying that like I think there are some hard lines here that we can use as guide marks. I think we won't be able to do that in the future with a lot of forms. We're going to have to make our own decisions about that. But I think for this sprint is going to be over at some point. At least for me, for sure, because I can't keep this up. So.
Yeah, there's definitely a phase transition here between the 209A and moving on to the next sort of set of work. That being said, I just want to make sure that as we have volunteers who are interested, that they're given a little something to keep them involved. And that could be even just like, we don't have time for you, like Michelle was saying, but here's what we're working with. Here's some stuff you can go play around with, even if it wasn't explicitly on a task. It's just like, go run some DocAssemble, try making some stuff in DocAssemble for fun, or try.
I think, David, though, just to like advocate for the PMs for Kate.
Yeah. No.
Like
it shouldn't be something you have to do other than say, hey, we hear you, like Michelle says, here's some links, go play around for a while.
Right.
Can I just interrupt here, because I think there's something that's going to be really useful is having people do the testing. So using the forms and actually running through, and that's where we're going to be putting in, and I've spoken to some volunteers about that now. Most of the volunteers are writing finals, the law students are writing finals this week, and that they'll free up next week when we've kind of hopefully finished the sprint. So that timing lines up. There's a handful of volunteers that if we don't contact them, we will lose them this week. And I'm hoping to get links to the forms, and that they can, even if they're just doing the standalone forms and they're not really helping, they can learn a bit about the process and stuff like that.
I think the fundamental problem too is that neither me, Kate, Michelle, nor Maeve are exclusively volunteer managers, right? Like Maeve needs to have capacity to do this plain line. We all have a part in getting the 209A across the line, and spinning up any new volunteer effort requires like a lot. So there's just,
I
don't think any of us are asking you to spin it up at the cost of this. We just don't want to lose people.
So in this vein, in the organization,
it sounds like Maeve has a good plan.
Michelle, it's not a plan, it's just organization styles. Michelle suggested that we use a Trello board for the volunteers. And as they get onboarded and they move through the process, we move their little card along and we label it with what they are interested in and stuff, so we can call upon them. So, and I think that calling on Lance to get involved in this will be really beneficial, and perhaps some other, I'm trying to think if there's I'll think of any other volunteers that might be able to assist. But basically just getting new people involved in the project and getting them up to date. I mean, as Michelle said, it doesn't take rocket science. Like
And you can delegate till your heart's content, right? So if Lance knows enough to be able to do that, just say, Lance, do this thing for me. And either Lance is going to be able to do it or he's not going to be able to do it.
Please do it.
Yes,
get that respect in there.
That's right. Yes, please do it.
No,
delegation
because
takes time too is the thing. Effective delegation takes time too. That's all.
No. And
I actually have to go.
Okay.
But I'll catch up with.
That's it.
talk to you guys
Protect
later.
your time. Do what you need to.
Are there other tasks? Like, so I think anytime I posted something like go through this list of courts and do something in Excel or Google Sheets, people jumped on those tasks really quick. Are there things like that we should be thinking of, we can get advanced help on, even if it's like, it's not a hard task and it might take you like 30 minutes to explain it and 2 hours for someone to do it, but it's an hour and a half you get back.
If you have tasks like that, please can you put them in the to-do list, and I'll pin that again in the admin. And I'll put it again in the channel, because that's where people can go and look for tasks, and that's where we can refer new volunteers and say, this is where you can go look while we're finishing this week. This is where you can go look for a task. So I think what maybe also might be a good exercise is to actually just go through the channel and see what slipped through, because there were definitely people suggested things or like asked questions and then no one picked them up. So that could also be something that someone could do. Matt, are you okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This is where we get this is my lawyer non-poker face.
I think some of this.
I was trying to get a smile. I even failed there.
I think some of this we're going to have to let each project manager kind of decide what they can take on, and when they can't take on more, they won't take on more, right? Like they won't assign new jobs or onboard new people onto new processes when that is not what they can do, right? But there are times when, for example, there is not another thing to do, and for me, I get antsy during that time, and I like to have a thing to do. So that, but I think it is important to watch all of our bandwidth, and if we need to not onboard new people, we can just send a message that says, hey, we care about you, we still know you exist. And that's it.
So it's like, this is a conversation where we're just filling up the backlog, and then we're trusting each of you to pull stuff onto your active list as appropriate.
Yeah. Okay.
Matt, does that seem, I want to make sure.
With that, Matt?
You do what you need to do. Right?
I'm fine. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You sure?
I wish I could get everyone candy or something.
Oh my God. Matt told me that his mom works in the M&M's factory. And ever since then, I've just been dropping M&M's, M&M's, what?
I worked in the factory. It was a terrible job.
Oh, now I'm having like one of my sons.
At all.
Yeah, well, that's one of my son's favorite books. So I'm imagining all of that.
Love it.
Willy Wonka, the Chocolate Factory, or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Willy Wonka. Okay. So I think we know where we're at, what we're doing. I just wanted to speak to Caroline for like 2 more minutes afterwards, just about the plain language stuff. Is there anyone else that needs to stay on the call, or can we just hijack this call? No?
I think just like fundamentally, in order to know how to spend my time, like I need to know what, if any, resources are still needed from me for getting the 209A in shape. Because like that is the concern I had that I felt wasn't addressed, in the sense of, I think everybody's absolutely right. People will take on what they have to take on, but I have no idea what I can take on because I don't know what's on my plate still. And so if I need to reserve the back half of this week to do some intensive coding with Michelle and Quentin, that's fine. I can do that and fend off my bosses at GBLS. But if I don't have to do that, then yeah, I'll set up testing, I'll onboard volunteers, that's great. But like, I don't know what I don't know. And I've been anxious because I feel like for a couple weeks now, we've been saying, the 209A is in stitching shape, and the stitching still isn't happening. And I think it is great to think about what this project looks like in the future and onboarding volunteers. But if we don't have a very good product that impresses the court right now, is no future. Like the court will find other ways. They're already doing that with the new standing order and starting video proceedings. So that is like the undercurrent of all this for me, that like I think too much energy is being spent on onboarding people for the next thing when the current thing isn't quite done yet. And we should be more focused on that.
I hear you. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that is my frustration. Like, and I just haven't really been able to voice it. And I feel like we've been in kind of the same place for 2 weeks on this. And I don't know what's next or what the timeline is. And I'm close to the top on this thing. So I can only imagine that people lower down are feeling the same.
So one thing to keep in mind is we set ourselves an ambitious timeline. And part of that was thinking, hey, we can get just the PDF and it's going to be just the PDF. And that's good. It's a good start. But we haven't really been able to do that. It's too hard to say, I'm going to just give this thing that's a broken product to people, which I think is a good impulse that we've had. But these projects generally take months. I think we're making a lot of progress and doing a really good job at splitting up the work so that we're able to make progress in the last several weeks. So we shouldn't feel like 2 weeks of not being done is a bad thing. It's very, very fast for this kind of project. But I think we can still keep meeting our goal, but we should remember that we're doing things like 3 or 4 or 5 times as fast as these projects would normally go.
But also, I think the thing is, and this whole thing about the 209A is everything's more complicated than you think. There's no such thing as 5 minutes in the tech world. But most of you had no idea how complicated the 209A is until you get into it. And Matt, it's a little bit like your week, because especially like with the court thing, it's not something that's familiar. So it is taking longer, and it's not a surprise, you know.
But that's not, I mean, thank you both, but
that's not his concern. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
The point, I know it's complicated, but what's the goal here? Because Quentin, with you saying it's just taking longer, it sounds like you're saying the goal isn't really the emergency, right? The goal is putting together a good product that changes how online form filing is in the state, nationally, and beyond, which is great. I'm on board for that goal. And if that's the goal, then let's take all the time we need. But if the goal is the emergency, then 2 weeks does matter. Like,
yeah, that's true.
That's true.
Okay.
I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm just saying
the flip side of that, Quentin and Matt, is also we're not talking about, because of the form that we picked and because of the emergency, it would be possible to actually do harm with the 209A.
But that's not where that's not.
And that's what I'm saying is if emergency is pushing it, what you don't want to do is provide something that is going to put people in more danger than the PDF. And I think that's what
we've already crossed that bridge, in the sense of where we've put in a lot of SME and plain language considerations for safety. What's happening a lot right now is I think we've already made that decision, and I think we're on the right side of it in terms of putting in a lot of checks. And I still think that, notwithstanding that, and that you're right, Caroline, that I'm still a little bit like, what are we doing and what's the timeline?
So
okay, so here's where we just want to if it's a choice. Now the thing is, I'm not convinced that it's a 100% choice between one and the other, because there are more people than there are. But if it was a binary choice, the choice would be 209A sooner, as soon as possible,
with lower potentially.
That would be the choice. Would just be like, throw all resources at 209A and get it done as fast as possible, if it was a choice. The problem is that there are not everyone can work on that. So there is capacity that could be working on other things as well. So it's just to what extent is it's necessary to sort of balance that. But if I had to make a choice one way or the other, I'd come down on Matt's side. Now that being said, I want to try to do some balancing. But if we think leaving Matt's time open at the end of the week gives him the freedom to be able to come in and do that at the end of the week, then great. Because politically, we do need the 209A sooner rather than later.
Are there Well, yeah, no, I agree with that. Well,
I don't want to, but I think Michelle has a really good point, which is that sometimes it's just telling people that we know you're there and we haven't forgotten about you. That's the main thing that I wanted to address when I brought up the question about other capacity. So it doesn't have to actually be give someone a.
I think, and maybe this is just a unique feeling with me, but I think, part of the subtext of that, David, is not wanting volunteers to be feeling like they're left at sea. And I guess what I'm sort of saying is I feel a little left at sea right now. Like, I think the project is a little at sea right now, not because anybody's doing a bad job, but because these are unprecedented times. And like, I don't know, like the courts are now closed till June 1st. What the fuck?
So are you feeling like you want to get it out the door and you haven't got anything to get it? Like you're waiting, there's nothing you can do right now to get it out the door. You're waiting for the next thing to do to get it out. I mean, is that what you're saying? It's like, this is important, but you don't have anything to do to contribute to it at the minute?
Not precisely.
What? Maybe maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Here's me trying to say it as simply as possible. For 2 weeks and I know you're right, Quentin, like saying, we're moving very quickly, but for 2 weeks now, 3 weeks, a month even, we've been on a sprint to get the 209A done. And I think a lot of us have been asking, are we sprinting or are we running a marathon? And it's hard to do both, right? It's hard to build both. It's hard to have structural institutions that do both at the same time. But I feel like I've dragged this whole conversation and meeting to a place it doesn't need to be. So maybe we can just.
Except I feel like it is a place that it needs to be, because
I agree.
It's clear that it's important. So let's just take a little more time with it to get to a clearer. So we're all at least on the same page. Back to Michelle's
just check in with
idea
everyone's
of
time. Sorry, David. Just
yeah.
If anyone has to jump off, then that's fine. But I think if you're willing to stay on and you want to chat about this quickly, then I'm happy to do that, and I have the time at the moment. The plain language will just wait.
As it always does.
I have a question which I don't actually know the answer to. So how many forms are there in the 209A, and are each of them at a different stage of progress? I've only been working on one.
How many no, Caroline, you're muted. I think the question isn't how many forms there are on the 209A. It's how many forms are in the 209A that we've agreed that we're going to get out. So things like defendant's motion to modify isn't vital. So how many forms are there that we have agreed we need to get ready?
We need Kate for that, but it's probably, it's plaintiff's confidential information form, defendant's information form, 209 page 1, 209 page 2, affidavit concerning care and custody, the regular affidavit.
I count 8, so I might be wrong.
And are they all like at the 80%, 90% stage? Or are some of them completely done?
I mean, every form that I was working on is ready for the stitching process. I don't think the number is useful. Like the work that needs to be done is putting it all together, and any bugs or errors that are in those forms are best resolved, in my opinion, during that process, as opposed to treating it on a form by form level.
Are you saying complaint page 1 is done? Because didn't you say that? Because I had a problem with it yesterday, and you said you fixed it, but you still have another problem. Didn't you say that this morning?
Well, because the bug got introduced when SMEs were putting in language, Caroline. So it was done, and then there was a bug that got introduced during the plain languaging.
But it's not done. But it's not done now, right? Because we still have to fix it, right?
But it's ready for the stitching together, and this is part of what I'm talking about, in the sense that, as Quentin said, these will never be done, right? But if we want to ever push a product out, we need to start putting it together at some point. And I'm sorry to be, I'm sorry for my.
No, this is really
harp on
this is a good conversation.
Really good conversation.
I just feel like it needs to be said.
So I have to go get my 2-year. I want to join the conversation about this still, though. I think maybe the answer, Matt, is that you should start the stitching. Because I think I have to push through I don't have the focused attention to do it until I finish this part of the affidavit that I'm working on, which might be by like tomorrow or the day after. But I've thought that several days in a row. It's just each day has fewer hours in it than I was hoping it would have.
If you lose me next week, which might happen.
Okay. So I would say if you feel comfortable just starting that, then I would start it. But I'm going to come right back.
Nap time ending.
Yeah.
So Matt, I feel like we're all closer together than maybe we seem.
No, I agree with that. I just, yeah.
Yeah.
What would you need to hear? I guess that's the other thing is, so, I mean, it is anxiety, right? So what, if this conversation, so to make you feel better, not to dismiss what you're, where you're coming from. But what would you need to hear? Because I think everybody's also trying to like reassure you and say we're on this, and it's not. We're not answering your concern, or so. I'm just wondering what do you need to hear to make you feel like we are on track and it is an emergency and we're going to get done what you think we need to get done? What is it that you need to hear?
Well, first, I would take some issue with your phrasing of what do you need to hear, because that does sound inherently dismissive.
All right, sorry. Okay, okay. I'm wrong about that then.
But I think this project has been 80% done for a while now. And we've all worked on projects, I think, where we spin our wheels in that 80% phase. And I'm fine with being in that 80% phase if that's what this is. If what we're doing is putting together a perfect 209A so that post-COVID, we have this excellent form to point to for automation. But just tell me that's the project I'm working on, right? That's not the project I was told I was working on.
Yeah, that's not the project we should be working on.
Right. The project I was told I was working on was that there's a balance between perfection and getting something out there, right? And in which case, why is no one in this 100-person project working on stitching the darn form together? And I'm sorry.
My understanding of that situation is that the people who can work on it now, like you've been assigned to it, but I didn't know that was a role you were willing to take. So I feel that the people who are able to stitch the form together are, or that I understood were able and willing to stitch the form together, were working on bits of the form that weren't done. So that was my understanding of where that was at.
That was also my understanding.
That was my understanding as well.
That was my understanding, which is why it's troubling to me to hear this now. Because I had the exact same understanding as you did, Michelle.
And I had the exact same understanding as well, which is I think why. So, I mean, how does that not, since we all have the same understanding, we're operating under the same understanding. The answer seems to have functionally been Quentin was bottlenecked. And so we're moving him over now.
But that's not what's happening, though.
Well, I mean, the other thing is
is that not what's happening?
The only person who could stitch it together, I think, we thought all along was Quentin, unless, Matt, you think that you're able to do that. The only person who can really...
I frankly don't. I'm flattered by Quentin saying...
offering, right. But, the only person who can stitch it together from this little circle that we think is Quentin. But also, the only person who could do the affidavit of care is also Quentin. And the affidavit of care, are we thinking that the affidavit of care needs to be done in order to stitch it together? Because then he's split there.
Well, if it's one of the forms that has been identified as one of the ones that you think you need to have, then it's a necessary precursor. So we have that bottleneck. There's just that's just an unavoidable bottleneck.
And Michelle, I know when you and I had discussed this, and we can bring this to Quentin if you're still in agreement, you and I, if I remember correctly, had both sort of said that, in the end, this thing is so much Quentin's baby that it's the most efficient to have him stitch it together. Because I frankly think the extra day and a half of me working on it isn't going to save any time, because Quentin is going to have to, that's just my hunch. Do you agree? Do you think that's unduly pessimistic?
It depends on the time he has. I mean, that's it. That's what we got. You know, I mean, yeah. I can try. And like if I get done with mine, then I can try. I think you can start to try and do it, start to understand what variables need to be shared, and start to try and stitch it together. And whoever has worked on stitching it together will work with the others when they join in. So that's, and I think it's important for us to be available, us who have coded the forms, to be available to say, to be on the call when it's being stitched in or when needed, to be able to say, oh, I made this variable and it's called this name and it's right here, right? So I think those are the ways that we can help. We can try to stitch it together. It's a bit hard to jump into someone else's code. So if Quentin feels he can jump into our code after we have tried to stitch some together, then that is helpful. If not, then not. But then it is just hard. Then it's a hard thing to sit with, and it's a hard thing to feel. And we just have to hope and do the best we can, because sometimes things aren't great in life, you know, unfortunately, then it's something you sit with.
Yeah,
I think I'm kind of hearing that I dropped a bomb and then walked away. Sorry about that.
No, it's just you. I think so let me try to summarize here, and then people can tell me if I'm doing a good job, and that'll be helpful, I think, to me to make sure I understand. It seems like the understanding is that basically we've been sort of at 80% for a while on the 209A, and we're trying to figure out, are we trying to make the perfect thing or trying to get something out now? And if we're trying to get something out now, why haven't we started working on the stitching? And the answer to that seems to be that the understanding was that there's sort of a bottleneck, which is that the only person we all universally feel comfortable doing the stitching is you.
Okay.
And that you're working on something else that's necessary to do before we do the stitching. So it's created an unavoidable block. And so the question is, how do we use all of our capacity to help push things forward if there is that unavoidable block? And is it truly an unavoidable block, and should we be retasking your effort one place or another so that we actually push it forward sooner than just letting the perfect be the enemy of the good? Is that close to where we're at?
That's what I understand.
Okay, that was my understanding as well. Okay.
Do other people agree?
I have a different solution, which maybe people will like better, which is I think all of the data structure stuff and thinking about how to ask the questions is done with the affidavit of care. So what I have been working on is finishing up the last little things, making sure that the right variables are in the right fields, that the formatting is right, that they're hidden when they're supposed to be hidden. If someone else feels like they could look at the code and do that better than the stitching, okay.
I'll do it.
Okay, there we go.
And I can start trying that instead.
Yeah.
And stop the twiddling that I'm doing and just move on to a new thing.
And that's a much... Yeah. And Matt, would you say that seems like a much more efficient use of, because we bring in Quentin as the power hitter, then you come in and do the cleanup.
Do we have other forms that are going to be packages like this? Because I'm sensing that part of the hesitancy is that people feel they don't quite know how to stitch things together with our design that we did early on with
Well,
I think that's something we're going to have to work out later.
I agree.
Well, what I'm wondering is, should we be cross-training someone to do this? Because there's a point where I can't be the bottleneck for everything, and I shouldn't be. So that could
I think not right now.
Process that we feel like we were forced to do, that we don't really need to, nothing sacred there, or that someone else learns how to do things the way that we're doing it. Whatever it is, it shouldn't be that I'm the blocker for more than one thing, for sure.
I think Quentin and Michelle, tell me if you think I'm wrong about this, but in our conversations, part of the subtext was like, your name's all over this thing, Quentin. Like, and there's a lot of style stuff with how you stitch this interview together. And so if it were me in your shoes, I'd want a heavy hand in that. And I don't know, like you're telling me you're not going to review this thing before it goes out and make a bunch of changes? And if not, and if so, would it have been faster for you to do it from the beginning? There's a lot of assumptions in the way I'm stating this, but that was what I thought our thinking was, Michelle. Do you agree, or did you think about it in a different way?
So it's similar. I think it is more nuanced than that, but that is I think that's a good overall picture. Like we generally, I think, should coordinate more on how code works, and on sharing what we're doing and on the process. I think there is like training people up as well on the skills they need. There are some ways to present questions that are not as complex programmatically. That is, they need knowledge of fewer atoms of DocAssemble, fewer of the pieces and functionality of DocAssemble than other ones, and we can discuss what those are. I don't think now is the time to do that, but I think that is a discussion that can happen and is important to happen if we're going to have multiple coders on this. And I think there are things like that to discuss. But I don't think that right now is the time for that discussion. If we're willing to make time for it later, it's either one person coding it, or it's creating a process and a common language and a method for review, including testing. I think testing would help a lot, like setting up a way to test it. And there are a couple people working on that right now, slowly as their schedule allows. And testing, we also
have an army of volunteer testers who can do things the hard and efficient way.
It's true. But then we need to write then we need to write test descriptions. Either way, we need to have specifications that will be followed so that testing is consistent and the right things get tested. Edge cases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because if you don't know what edge cases are and you don't know how they're important, then you need instructions on what edge cases to do. And by specifications, I mean step-by-step specifications. Right now, it's good. Right now, we have who we have, and they're going to run through it, and hopefully the numbers will make up for the specifications we don't have. But as a practice, that's not very useful as far as QA goes.
Yeah,
that's just what I understand of the QA testing world.
So if I was to, again, try to summarize just to make sure that I understand that we're in agreement. Wait, quick question. How many people are familiar with the idea of technical debt? Okay, good.
After yesterday.
So,
there will, just FYI, there will always be technical debt.
Yeah, so basically right now in the balance between sort of technical debt and expediency, we're saying screw the debt, not entirely, but we're saying we're going to not worry so much about the debt now because we are going to do this phase change between now and after 209A, where we'll take a step back, look at the lessons learned, implement processes. But for right now, we're just trying to get through to get a true MVP out the door. I feel like I used way too many jargony words there. Did I summarize at all?
Right now, I would say that right now we're saying screw the debt.
Yeah.
I don't think there is a whole lot of debt. I don't think this project has accumulated that much debt. And it's early on in the project, and that's a huge advantage. I just think
Oh, sorry. No, I thought you were done.
I think it's an acceptable amount of debt, and even if it's not, it's the amount of debt we need right now.
And to make sure we're on the same. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt?
Go ahead.
To clarify that we're all on the same page again, safety and plain language are not a part of the debt because that's already being. I feel like that's already being taken seriously. Like, do we agree on that? That when we're saying screw the debt, we're not saying screw.
No, not the safety. No. The forms themselves
we're just talking about the technical
are as best as we can get them.
So I think we're back at where we originally specified, which is that we're trying to balance between getting something out as quickly as possible without doing any harm. So the hurdle we're trying to clear is do no harm and be better than the existing status quo. And that's the only bar we need to clear. And then we're incurring some technical debt in the way we're doing that because we're trying to be expedient, but it's manageable, hopefully, and it is what we have to do in order to get it out in the time we need to get it out. But
Yeah.
we're going to make sure we come back, and as we enter this phase change, put in the processes and the lessons we learned from this going forward. And I think it's entirely true that after this phase change, it is a marathon, and then everyone should crank it down a level because this is not sustainable. And right now it's a sprint. So I feel like what it is, it's a relay race. And the first bit is a sprint where everyone's sprinting. And then the second legs in the relay race are going to be a little lower key. I'm mixing metaphors like crazy, but I think we're getting to the same place, right? We're all on the same page.
And so does that mean, and like maybe from a project manager standpoint, like, and I can take a crack at this, drafting a message that says, hey, maybe you haven't heard from us as much, but it's because X, we're hoping to do a phase change by Y date, expect to hear a lot more from us then. And then like also promising to ourselves as a leadership team then that what we're really going to focus on is the sprint, right? And not the marathon. Knowing that the marathon stuff will get done next week or the week after, and that the message sent by the courts in terms of, saying at least June 1st, their order literally says they're closed until at least June 1st, is that we have time to do the marathon. Does that sound right to people? Is that unfair?
Oh, yeah. And I think also, this is the first form project that I've done where we had access to send things directly to the court. And every form project that I did, I felt was a really valuable one without that. So this is an evergreen project, regardless of what our relationship ends up being long-term with the court. So we should never feel like it'll be too late to do anything. Anything we can do on any new form will help somebody.
And then conversely, because I think the frustration I sense from Matt, which I sometimes get too, is that like, yeah, but we're trying to deal with this emergency right now and get so because there are some people whose motivations to be working here right now are just to address the emergency needs. And as soon as the 209A form's done, it's going to be harder to justify time away from their normal lives. So they'll be here for that. And then they can leave and we can have all happy, okay, goodbye. And then the second guard can take up.
Yeah.
Can I ask, Matt, I know you said something about that message. That sounds like a really good idea. Do you have bandwidth to draft that?
So also I can do bandwidth here because to the extent that, I'm not in the weeds with everyone else on this, but for having being pulled in those directions, and it might be appropriate for me to say that being to put together a message. That being said, the people deal with are you three and Kate.
I think it has a certain gravitas coming from you, David. So I think that's good.
And then,
okay, I'll put something together and then you can all chime in with.
Yeah.
And
just to respond to what Quentin said too, though, like, I think for me, the overall point of this is not like, those are both good projects. The sprint and marathon are both good projects, but in a very real way, like what I do moment to moment is determined by which of those are running right now. Which race are we running? And so like, I can't run both races, and I don't think any of us can. We can try. That's all.
No, I'm really glad you brought this up, Matt, and it seems like it's been helpful. And even just a really concrete thing of you're going to finish up the affidavit. So
that
really is
like
something I should have decided
worth
earlier.
all of this time is that determination, because I think that actually is a really good efficiency packing of skills.
Okay. So one thing we will have to do, and this is a very technical question, is we have mandatory blocks in all of the forms right now. We're going to need to take those out for the stitching together. And the question is, do we make two completely separate files, like one's a copy and one's the main one?
If the form's going to run by itself, some of them will run by themselves though, right?
Yeah.
I know.
Well, so this is a question. Sorry, Maeve, did I interrupt you? I apologize.
No, I was saying yes. That's what you are.
This is a question for you. To what extent can we say that these forms run in order? Like, are we going to be mixing and matching questions from different forms? Because if we're not, then it's pretty easy, right, Quentin? But if we want to do that, it's a little more complicated. I don't think the code is more complicated either way. I think it's just tougher to wrap your head around.
Yeah, we definitely want to mix and match.
Some of them will need to be, right? Yeah. And then there's some forms that you might not use in some circumstances as well, right? Like if there's no kids, there's no affidavit concerning care and custody.
Or page 2.
Or page 2. Okay. So I guess that really.
Are you including a motion for impoundment in this? Did you include the motion for impoundment? Yeah, it is. Okay, so that's an optional one as well.
So I think we'll just make a copy of everybody's standalone forms and we'll make changes in a copy. It'll be easier to make the tweaks we need to make that just right for the stitched together version. But it does mean if we make an improvement in one, we'll have to backport it to the other. Does that seem like a good way to handle it? It's not the only way we could do it, but it's probably the way for us to get results.
Here's a question. To the extent that these other forms do stand on their own, are they ever actually reasonably standing on their own? Or do we really want to just stitch them?
Some are not.
None. I don't think any of them stand on their own.
The affidavit.
They're always going to be part of something else.
Someone might fill it in separate from the 218A package, though.
Yeah, but it would be another.
If we don't
package.
have the other part ready, but we have the affidavit they need to fill out, they might just do our standalone affidavit and then do the other form a different way.
We are talking about affidavit of care. They wouldn't do our standalone affidavit. They do the affidavit of care.
Yeah, affidavit of care is what I was thinking.
Or defendant information, I guess. I mean, some of those, and motion for impoundment. All of those could be standalones, I guess.
But there's a subset different package in that scenario, right? Like it wouldn't really be you only file this form and that's your whole case. That wouldn't make any sense. So
in that case, then the backporting isn't as important to stick for as a foundation for these other packets.
Okay. And so Matt, you had 3 forms that were ready. Michelle, you're still working on the page 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Page 2.
All right. So.
But you could do stitching together with what you have from me, Quentin, for a case where there aren't children, basically.
Okay, that wouldn't be bad to just get something up quickly. That's just the no kids. So all the parts we're working on are for kids?
I think
that are still being worked on?
Affidavit of care and custody and page 2, right, Caroline? Are both kid forms? Yes.
Two kid forms.
Yeah. So I think everything for cases that don't have kids is ready. And again, because of the sprint approach I took in coding, there's going to be issues. It's going to be issues in my forms, but I'm here. Just
well, like it fills in the form, but you're saying you might have asked the question a different way if I was looking over your shoulder, or
things. Like there's all different, the court selection was not working when I made these forms. So court selection is wrong in those forms. Basic questions has changed, but the call I made was that let me get in order the stuff that is specific to this form, because I don't want to spend the time on this other stuff now because it's going to change by the time we stitch it together anyway. And so that the stuff that is implicated in, how do you ask about children? How do you ask about defendants? That might be in a sorry state, but that was a choice because in the end, it's better to resolve it all at once at the end than piecemeal in individual form. Or that was my call at the time.
No, that makes a ton of sense. So let me think. Anything else we need to say about that? There are some, I think I posted something about the court selection screen. I have that's the main one where I think there might be a little bit of work to do still, but it doesn't have to hold us up from releasing it. There are little things like that I put, and I got a ton of response to the plain language question about how to ask people about whether they're the defendant or the plaintiff on the LSN tab. Lots of people just sent me messages. I tried to put some of those on the thread we had on GitHub. I don't want to lose track of those things, but they don't have to hold us up from releasing what we have. So.
The other thing I'm wondering about, and this may be family law, is this whole thing about the court selection. I guess that's what's the court selection is what populates the options that somebody can choose from, and then Okay, all right. So that's not going to change. It's just that it's going to be very different in the family law cases than the other cases. But you're just talking about the options that you provide.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really complicated user experience for how do you say, okay, we have 5 courts you can choose from.
Right.
How do you let someone meaningfully choose one? Whether or not it's about substantive considerations, it's like, just like, how do I know which court is closer to me? Like, they don't even have it. How do you convey that information?
Yeah.
And then how do we also make sure that we don't have an error in our code that prevents someone from advancing? If, like, we should always let them choose from all of the courts in some way. So that's like another UI thing, I think, right? If our guess of what court they're in based on their city is wrong, we don't want that to stop them from being able to finish the form. Because we have this nice super feature that actually makes their experience worse if we do it incorrectly. So I don't want to just guess how to solve those. I don't want to guess wrong. I'd like some user experience help on that.
So Anne might be able to do some of that if we can get her some user experience. She might be able to design that kind of interview. I also have someone who, if that's what we're looking for, then he has more experience and might be available if that's what we're looking for.
It's a thing that we can integrate into our existing project when it's ready, I think.
Okay.
So for now, I'm just going to show people all of the courts. And
okay.
For housing court, it was easy. We could select the housing court. That's always the best court for a housing case. We can let people make other choices, but we can make that the default. When there's like 3 or 4 possible venues to choose from, and there's competing considerations, we can't just say this is the best court for you to use. Mm-hmm. It's harder. So I do think it's going to be kind of shitty for people who have family law cases, and we say, choose the court you like. Here's a list of 100 courts. We're not even going to tell you which court serves your city. That's going to be not great, but it won't last for that long, hopefully.
And we can provide a link to the court finder.
That's what we do.
That'll be helpful, yeah.
But the court finder is really just a page with 100 cities' names on it. So
right.
You have to scroll down and figure out which court. Not really a finder, just a directory.
No. But directory is something.
Directory is something, yeah.
And again,
they would have
viable
access
product.
to. Yeah.
Minimum viable product.
Yep. So I really didn't even have to bring that up now, but I just didn't want to forget it.
So it sounds like we've got a plan forward. Matt, do you think we've addressed or expressed and addressed the concerns that you were bringing up?
I'm so much happier than I was before.
Good.
Okay.
I think it's good. I think it's great. I mean, we managed to define this in a way that I wasn't even expecting. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, and sorry to be a curmudgeon and just being in general.
No, this is not curmudgeon at all. This is really, I actually feel
this is a great project management thing that you just did.
Yeah, because I feel bad because I think I feel like Quentin and I have had conversations about some of these things, and I have not done a good job of communicating them to the Troika +1. So I think I need to do a better job of that.
Thank you for
that.
So, yeah.
One of the things we might want to consider out of this as well then is how maybe that group can have a more regular set of conversations. Because I was relying sort of on these with like little followers after. But maybe there should be
actually, can someone take notes on this? The things that we have discussed here, if anybody, I'm not good at remembering after the fact.
If you upload this on YouTube, then I can note it, just watch double speed and note it, but that'll be tomorrow if that's okay. I want to do that plain language.
I think we have
plain language first. No, this isn't priority, but at some point since we have it
that's
recorded,
why
I
we're
didn't even know it was recorded. But
that's why we're recording all these so that we can go back and capture this stuff. So
someone just make a note of what day it was, and then
okay.
I
thought it was for our documentary that's going to come out later.
Oh yeah,
that's right.
The Zoom documentary, Netflix documentary.
Oh,
this is really, I actually think the way
that.
we've been working in the open is going to be a really nice. I mean, this makes a really nice case study, I think. And I like the idea of us having all this stuff for posterity.
I also do want to say from a management perspective, like let's not be too hard on ourselves, right? Like this is, as Quentin was saying, like 2 weeks of minor flailing is not a lot for a project. Like
no.
There are projects where this conversation never happens and nothing ever gets done. I think it's pretty.
But
great.
we have you, Matt. That's right. The difference is we have you.
Getting upset. I'll throw a tantrum any day of the week if it'll.
Squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
This is a good lesson for me because I have been trying to. It's a hard balance to figure out how much to protect people from things and how much to share with things. And so this makes me realize I need to adjust my dial. So think about what you think the forum is for that, and we'll talk some more offline about this.
Sure.
We're probably getting near the end of this call, and I know I have another call I've got to jump on.
Me too.
Yeah.
I've got dinner, but
I feel like, yes. Were you okay? Was something attacking you earlier? What was?
There is a moth. I don't know if you can see it. It's like, it's so big. I'm not.
No, it's hilarious because it's invisible to the screen. It looks like you're fighting a ghost.
It's so. We've got so many moths here. I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. But yeah, I maybe I just wanted to talk to Caroline for like 2 seconds. Is that okay? Just about the imperative versus the respective. Yeah. Just for the plain language thing, and then I'm going to have dinner, and then I'm going to come back and do that plain language.
I think you and Caroline might have to jump on another Zoom call because I have to use this Zoom to do my other call.
Do you have 2 minutes, Caroline?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, guys. I was saying this a lot in the very beginning of our work together, and I have not said it as much lately. And apparently, I also became like dictatorial, like Lance, just do the thing earlier. But we fully recognize that everyone is here because they are giving very generously of their time. We really appreciate that. It wouldn't be happening without you. This is just, I don't know. I imagine this is when people, talk about, the people they work with when they're in like a war situation or something, and the camaraderie and the teamwork and we are a family of people who are here by choice. So thank you for being part of that family.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Totally 100% agreed.
And to everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why everyone should be on these meetings. But,
and maybe send it out, since people weren't here.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to take some stuff, put it in a message. I'm going to run it by the admin group so that because I'm going to lay it out with phases.
Okay.
To help make it concrete for people. And then
I mean like the appreciation. That's what I was talking about.
I'll put that in there as well too. I was doing a good job at the beginning, but I need to keep that up.
Yeah. Well,
nice to share your emotions. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.